morning, Kingdom Kids. It's really nice to see you again, spend some time with you again this morning. So today we have lesson 2 from the story of Moses, lessons in lockdown. So Moses was a baby, do you remember from last week? And his mum, the Egyptians had been told to kill all the boys that were born. So Moses' mum hid him, put him in a special basket because she knew he was a very special baby, and put him in the river Nile, in the reeds. And his older sister watched from the reeds to see what would happen to him. And the king's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, was walking with her maids along the riverbank, and they saw the baby in the basket in the reeds, and they went and got him. And as they opened it up, they were like, "Oh, it's a baby! It's a Hebrew baby!" And one of the maids said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew mums to look after him for you?" So she was like, "Oh yeah, go on then." And Moses' sister ran out and said, "I know somebody that can look after him." So how amazing is that? Moses was a special baby, and he was supposed to be killed, but they hid him in a basket in the river, and he gets found by the princess of the king. And then she sends his mum to look after him, so God saves him. And his mum looks after him till he's old enough to eat by himself, and then she gives him back to the Pharaoh's daughter, and she adopts him as her son. So Moses grows up in the palace of Pharaoh. Whoa, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? That God would do that, keep him safe and put him in the king's palace. So anyway, Moses grew up, and the Egyptians were still oppressing, pushing down, being horrible to all the slaves, the Israelite slaves. And one day Moses went to look at them because they were working and working and working, like we realised last week, like we learnt about last week. And he saw them being worked so hard, and he had compassion on them. That means he felt a bit sad and sorry for them and wanted to help. So he saw one of the Egyptians beating the slave, a bit like Andrew was beating me last week. And that made him really, really cross. And so he killed the Egyptian. Henry the pussycat's meowing over there. Can you hear him? He's making a bit of a noise. He killed the Egyptian. Oh no. He was trying to help, but he killed him. And do you know what? That news got back to Pharaoh, because you weren't allowed to kill any Egyptians. You would die if that happened. So that news got back to Pharaoh, and even though Moses had grown up in the palace with his mum, the Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh wanted to kill him. So Moses was afraid, and he ran away. In a place called Midian. And he'd run and run and run and run and run. And he sat down by a well, because that's where you got a drink in those days. He sat down by the well thinking, right, well, what do I do now? And there were some daughters, there were 7 daughters who were looking after their dad's sheep, came to the well to bring up buckets of water for their sheep to give them a drink. And these other shepherds came along and shooed the girls away. And Moses saw that and he said, hey, hang on a minute, that's not right. And he helped the girls. He shooed the shepherds away and he helped those girls and fed the sheep. So they went back to their dad. You gonna come and see us, are you? Come on, you. Here he is, look, can you see him? Let's have a little look. He's making all that noise. They went back to their dad and they said, Dad, this Egyptian man, he helped us. So he said, well, go and get him then. Bring him back for some tea. So that's what they did. Moses went back to the where they lived, and he ended up staying with them and living with them. And he got married to one of Jethro. Jethro was the man, the dad. He got married to one of their daughters and he lived with them and helped them look after the sheep. Now, lots and lots of time went by. I think it was about 40 years. My gosh, that's a long time, isn't it? That Moses lived in the desert with Jethro and his family. But God had a bigger plan. Now, we're going to go back to Egypt now. So, back in Egypt, Pharaoh had died. And the children of Israel cried out to God and groaned and cried under all that bondage. Bondage means like the slavery they were in and how hard they were being worked and the oppression that was on them. They cried out to God. And God heard their cry. Now, we're going to go back to the desert now. So, back in the desert. Now, Moses looked after Jethro's sheep, and one day he was in the desert looking after the sheep, and he came across this bush. But it wasn't an ordinary bush, it was burning. Now, do you remember last week when we talked about Pentecost and the fire of God came and it burned on people's heads, but it didn't burn them, it didn't burn them up. This was the same with Moses and his bush. It was on fire, but it wasn't burning the bush. It was God's fire. And he was looking at it, and he was like, what on earth is going on there? And he suddenly heard God's voice. Moses, Moses, I'm the God of Israel. Take off your sandals, because this is holy ground. Now, why would you have to take your sandals off or your shoes off? It's just because out of respect to God, because it was such a holy place. So Moses sat down, took his shoes off and sat down, and then God spoke to him and told him, I've got a plan for Israel in Egypt. I've heard their cry. And do you know what? You're the bloke for the job. I want you to help me. I want you to help me set them free. Moses was like, whoa, what, me? I can't do that. I'm not the right man for the job. I can't do that. And he kept saying to God, I can't do it. But God knew that he'd destined Moses to do that job right from the beginning. So Moses agreed. Now we're going to leave our story there. And we'll do the rest next week. So what can we learn from lockdown? The second part of Moses. Well, the first thing we can learn is that even in difficulty, even in our difficult times like we have been in lockdown and other situations that we go through, God always has a plan. Always has a plan to set us free, to get us out of that difficulty. So that's the first lesson we can learn. Now, Moses didn't know he was part of that plan. But it was how God saved him. He should have been killed. He should have been killed with all the other Israelite boys, the Hebrew boys. He should have been killed, but he wasn't. God saved him and put him right underneath the king's nose. He lived with the king. So he lived with the enemy, really. And God protected him and kept him safe all that time. What's the other thing we can learn? So God always has got a solution, a plan to get us out of trouble or difficulty. What's the other thing? Do you know what? It took the Israelites a very long time to cry out to God for help. It was like years and years and years. So God couldn't help until they cried out to him. So the other lesson we can learn is that we need to cry out to God. We need to be looking to God to set us free from our problems and our difficulties. We can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it. Israel was with us. They were slaves for years and years and years, making all those bricks like I showed you last week, doing all the hard work, living in awful conditions. But and when they cried out to God and said, God, help us with this bondage. God heard them and he was like, oh, finally, they've asking me to help them. Great, now we can get on with the plan. And that's when he told Moses. He said, come on, mate, you're part of my plan. Let's get to it and help these Israelites out. So next week, we will see what God did and how he used Moses to set all those people free, all the Israelites free. Okay, so I'm going to say, bye, love you lot, see you next time.